Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of What Is It? We don't know. That's what we're trying to find out. We do this each and every month here on the channel with this crew, talking about bands that don't really fit in any one genre and kind of infiltrate many different genres. So we're going to try and discuss and talk about what makes Steely Dan, and what the hell do you call them, right? So let me introduce the cast. Brendon Snyder's here.
How you
Scot
doing?
Lade from the Prog Corners here. And Mr. Grant Arthur from Grant's Rock Warehouse and the Contrarians in the house. What's going on, gentlemen?
Greetings,
Good.
Pete.
Hey, nice to see you. Nice to see everybody today.
Yeah.
We go from Pomp Rock last month to
Jazz rock.
Whatever this
jazz
is.
rock, pop, jazz rock,
I think that really
funk
considered.
rock, pop, jazz, funk. I
Yeah,
don't know.
what are they? Space rock? I don't know. I mean, I've heard them referred to as all kinds of things.
Yeah,
Of
there's a
course,
All
lot
my
of
kinds of
different
things, and
categories.
no one classification, right?
right?
It depends on who you talk to. They will give you a different kind of explanation of what the music of Steely Dan is all about. I mean, I know people. I think Scott, you and I have had this conversation that you often feel that Steely Dan's is prog is yes, right, but in a different way. But
Totally
most people
different
wouldn't
way.
say they're a prog band, right? But do
So the
they
one
do?
thing
Very
we know
technical.
it's not though, Pete. We can't necessarily say exactly what it is, but the one thing it definitely is not is yacht rock.
It's
Ah, see,
Oh,
I was
no,
saying, well, there's
no.
certain
It
songs
probably is yacht rock
Oh,
too.
put
I
them
will
in.
one up you,
19
Scott. You know what?
FM?
Steely Dan is definitely not heavy metal.
Right. That's
But
right. I
yacht
thought you were
rock,
going.
well, there's a couple
Yeah.
songs here and there that I think
Oh yeah,
All of Gaucho is yacht. A
Yeah.
Kinda
lot of
is.
Asia's yacht because the smoother
Pretty
you
work.
get, the more yachty you become.
the
Yeah.
more Rhodes keyboard you have in your sound, the better the chance you're a yacht rock band. And yeah, Gaucho is just Rhodes from wall to wall Rhodes. So yeah, that thing is a yacht
But
rock
FM
recipe.
is yacht rock. I'm
FM.
sorry.
Yeah.
It
It's
is. I was
smooth.
pulling your chain.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Well, it's easy. You got a rise out of us. I'll leave it at
That's
that.
right.
But
So let-
don't forget Yacht Rock didn't exist when this came out. That's
No.
something that
Right. That's a retro
Sirius
group.
XM came up with, and it's stuck.
Yeah.
It's stuck for a reason.
Yeah.
It
Doesn't
does fit
perfect.
that.
What was the terminology used at the time, though? Was it
Light
considered
rock.
Soft rock, right?
Soft
Light
rock,
rock or
okay.
Light
soft
rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Soft rock, light rock, whatever. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
My dad was a jazz musician, right? He grew up playing tenor and alto sax, guitar, and piano in a lot of jazz bands in the 50s and early 60s. So I was real interested as a kid in his opinion as to whether or not, this was a jazz band or a rock band. And he said, I think I was probably like 12 or 13 when I asked him, and he thought they were a rock band that used jazz chords. So they used the language of jazz with the construct of rock and roll, and that was what he heard when he listened to Steely Dan. And I think over the years I've kind of gotten real close to that opinion myself, in that
I would
they're
agree.
not a jazz band, right? I mean, this
Right.
isn't nobody's confusing these cats for the electric period of Miles Davis. This is a rock band that happens to use the vocabulary of jazz to great effect. I mean, just such a great band.
Yeah, a lot of
How about-
suspended chords.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And how about the fact that they employed so many great jazz musicians on all of
The
their albums,
session guys throughout, right?
right? I mean, the session musicians and even the regular band, because we kind of forget early on, Steely Dan was a band on those first couple albums, but
Mhm.
then it became more of a Donald Fagen, Walter Becker,
Right.
and company, right, type of thing, filled with
Right.
great musicians in the studio. But
You're right. I'm glad you said that, Pete, because you are ignoring the greatness of Jeff Skunk Baxter and Denny Diaz at Jim Hodder at your own risk, because those guys just cooked on those first few Steely Dan records.
yeah.
You could tell they were a band, a real, actual live rock and roll band that turned into something, totally different, a studio creation. But early Dan was just so special.
And
All
you
three
hit
of
the
those.
nail on the head, right? Because this was a band. And I would
Right.
say early on, you can make the argument that in 1972 with their debut album, Can't Buy a Thrill, that this is probably the most straight ahead rock album in their catalog, right? You
Definitely.
can make that
Well, they've
argument.
also got a front man for this
Yeah.
one with David Palmer on this, where
Yeah.
after that, he's out of it, and then they move with Donald Fagen doing lead on it. So, okay, they're closing ranks on it, but that first album has the defined role of each musician within it.
Yeah, I would agree. And
And
also at
and
this
not
time,
only
they were-
well, not only is it rock, but there's a lot of pop on it.
Yeah.
well, but Grant, I think pop is a part of their music overall, right, from start to finish. I mean, I
Sure.
would argue the one constant in their music on any album is they were a great pop band.
Yeah.
You have these, I mean, there's the funk element, there's the rock
Right.
element, there's certainly the jazz element, the smooth element, all that sort of thing. But I
Yeah.
think at their core, Steely Dan were always a great pop band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no coincidence that that very first album had 2 smash hits. And as a little kid, I was like 9 years old when Steely Dan broke into the top 10 with not one but 2 giant hits on that record. I mean, Do It Again, first thing I ever heard by the band.
Great song.
And then a couple months later, reeling in the years, climbs all the way up the charts. I'm a little kid. I'm listening to top 40 radio, that's what I knew. So I knew Steely Dan extremely well. So I knew that weirdo oddball singer. I always wondered what was the use for David Palmer, and was that just like did they need him to get signed? Was that something
No.
the label need? This other guy, his voice is just a little too weird, right? I mean, we need like a real rock guy.
Yeah, they didn't think Fagan really had commercial potential.
Oh,
And they brought in Palmer because, well, he had a good
he's got an
singing
amazing voice. Yeah.
great voice.
Yeah.
And well, they threw him a couple of songs to sing, but he was brought in to the record company.
Yeah. I figured.
How many of you, yeah, that's a really good point. How many of you so when this album came out, I was 6, right? So I was a little too young, but I started to take notice of Steely Dan a couple of years later. How many here, maybe not Scott, but
Yeah.
how many thought perhaps that, Dirty Work, which was a minor hit, was a different band?
Yeah.
Because I didn't even know that was a Steely Dan song until many, many years later.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because
They used to play it on FM rock radio all the time. And when I first heard it, that's where I heard it. And I had no idea who it was.
Right.
And then I learned it was Steely Dan. And I went, wait, what?
yeah,
This is
but
like an
that's not
early
that voice
days
that we're
or
used to,
something.
right?
Yeah.
No,
And it became even more confusing in that you had Midnight Cruiser sung by the drummer.
And he's
you
great.
know? Oh, yeah, he is. Jim Hodder, just awesome.
Great
But,
voice too. Yeah.
They didn't really have an identity. So as a little kid, yeah, I was a little confused. I only knew about singles. Their second album really didn't have any big hits.
No.
So it wasn't until their third album, when that Ricky Don't Lose Your Number song climbed up the charts, that my older brother got super interested in the band. So he went back, bought Pretzel Logic, Countdown, and Can't Buy a Thrill. And to me, the thing that was the most amazing was that's all the same band, right? I really didn't know. It sounded like a lot of different bands. And that's kind of what was cool about Steely Dan, was that they could handle a lot of those different types of genres and still sound awesome.
But these guys were just a studio band. Record company wanted them to go out on tour.
Yeah.
Yep.
They didn't want to go out on tour. They just wanted to do their art in the studio. And it's funny because on that box set, now I don't have any of the remasters. I've got like the original CDs, the Made in Japan MCA stuff. And then I've got the box set, and the box set does have a cut on there of them playing live, 73 maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know if that came out on anything else, if there've ever been any other bonus tracks. I don't know. Maybe one of you know. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I think so, though. I think there's been a few instances of some of those that have crept out on different things. Look what he's got there.
So I've got this very cool set. I don't even
What
remember
is
where I got
that?
this from, but this is really cool. So this
Oh,
is
okay.
so we've got one show from the University of California in Irvine from 1974 that was I guess broadcast on KSAN FM. Got another show I guess live in the studio at the record plant in Sausalito, also from 74, and then Ellis Auditorium in Memphis 1974, and then a couple of shows from 93. So I mean they played fairly often early on live.
Early on, yeah.
You hit the nail on the head, Grant. I don't think, especially Fagan, was never much into touring.
So
And it's funny that later in their career, that's what they do now, is tour.
That's what I was
They
going to
did.
say. Today, that's all they do is tour. They haven't made an album in 20 plus years at this point. And they're just known for that. Now, of course, we know that the model in the industry has changed, right? Early on, you could be a studio band, your album sold, you made money that way. You didn't make a lot of money touring back then because the whole idea was you were promoting the album to sell the album. But today, you release the album to promote a tour because the touring is where the money is. So
You really hit the nail on the head about the industry changing. And if you think about Two Against Nature, that was like a whole era ago. That thing actually sold over 1 million physical copies.
Yeah.
And nobody does that anymore unless you're Adele or Taylor Swift. I mean, it's
Right.
a whole different world. There's really very little incentive for bands to do a record and possibly tarnish their legacy when it's not going to impact the sales of their tour one iota, whether or not they've got a new record they're promoting. Just, call it the Dan's greatest hits and people will show up. It's, it's the Legacy Act thing. And it's, it is interesting why he all of a sudden loves playing live, though, when for years and years he never wanted to.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But this came out in the time frame right before streaming hit big, right? There was Napster, but there wasn't the streaming industry. And once Apple Music came out a few years later, and you can look at the 2003 album, Everything Must Go, didn't sell, didn't hit the platinum or the gold mark. Now, that might have also just been that this one came out with the hype of the first album and however many years. People ran out to get it. It was reunion. It was all of that sort of stuff.
But you are correct. 2000 was the absolute peak of the industry. If you look at pre-recorded music sales, the absolute peak of power of the pre-recorded music industry was 2000. Biggest sales. After 2000, things just crashed, and I think we know what. It was all that Napster and digital and just killed the industry, just crushed it. So everything in its wake was going to be secondary. And
I think Brendon makes a good point. I think, it was however many years. I mean, we're talking like probably 30 plus years between Gaucho and this one here. And you have to wonder if the sales were driven by absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? So all of a sudden people really missed Steely Dan. So here's a point I wanted to make. If we go, and maybe over the next couple of minutes, we'll start to do that. If you go and look at this whole catalog from the very, very first album all the way through to the last album, every album has a little bit different feel and flavor, right? They were constantly progressing from album to album to album. So if you listen to Gaucho and then Two Against Nature, even though there's all those years in between, they're kind of similar sounding albums. And then Everything Must Go, in my opinion, is basically part two of this. They're not different at all. And I think, to me, the reason why this album was just kind of met with a little bit of indifference from the fan base is because most loyal, hardcore, longtime fans were used to every Steely Dan album being a very different listening experience. You kind of don't really get that with these two. I think they're fine for what they are. I like them, but to me, they
didn't break any new ground.
The rest of this catalog,
there's no growth.
There's that, right? I mean, there's 100% Grant. There really isn't any growth. It's like, all right, we're an older band now. We're recording again. This is what we're doing. They're safe albums. They're fine albums, but personally, I don't find them all as interesting a listen. As almost everything.
Don't the Steely Dan community pretty much think that Asia was the peak? Because I don't think when Gaucho came out, or at least some of I don't think it was quite as good as Asia.
I agree.
And I think they just hit that peak. It's normal. A lot of these bands do that. We talk about this all the time. Hit their peak and then maybe they level out. But it seems like Steely Dan hit their peak, maybe went down a little bit because, what did Gaucho really... It was Asia Part 2, but not quite as adventurous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they just kept on that. I think they took it as far as they could go. Because
I think Fagan's The Big Fly is stronger than Gaucho, personally.
I agree 100%.
Absolutely. But keep in mind, Gaucho came out 3 years after Asia. So that was the longest break they'd ever had between records. And I think retroactively, Gaucho is gaining some gloss. I think over the years, I always figured it was my least favorite Dan album up to that point. Easily. I like everything before it
People
better.
love it now.
People love
It's the
Gaucho.
yacht
People
rock
are
fans.
turning on Gaucho,
Yes.
man, and they're like listening to it again, saying, "You know what? I was wrong about Gaucho because this album's awesome."
Because everybody loves yacht rock now. Gaucho.
Yeah.
Babylon Sisters. Go on the serious yacht rock. They'll play Babylon Sisters. They'll play Hey 19. Well, Hey 19's brilliant. I'll give you that.
Of course.
There isn't anything more yachty than that, you know. Columbia Gold and you're out on your yacht. I don't know. Just leave it at that.
But see, I think that's the thing. You know, Gaucho played to what was going on at the time. Prior to that, Steely Dan was setting the pace. They were the ones who were defining things, doing the unique album that was really setting up what would be yacht rock or soft rock. But by the time they got to Gaucho, they were just doing what anyone else was doing. And so,
which included a lot of drugs.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of coke going on. I'll leave it at that.
Drugs became a real problem during Gaucho. It affected the recording process. It affected the relationship with the label. It affected the relationship between the two main dudes in the band. And I think some of that crept out into the press at the time. So, you know, if you were in the business in 1980, you already had like a certain expectation that this was not going to be a good record, but it's fantastic. Somehow, some way they managed to pull off another fantastic record. And to your point about Everything Must Go, not having any growth versus Two Against Nature, I think the other thing, the dog in the room here is that it just wasn't as good an album. The songs weren't as good.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Two Against Nature holds up pretty well. It's a good record, but yet how often do I reach for it in the last 24 years since it came out?
Not a lot, right?
Yeah, not a bunch.
I mean, I don't have any problem with it. I think it sounds great. Obviously, the playing on is absolutely top notch. There's no Steely Dan album that, you know, is bad. It's not a bad record. It's just, but I never reach for it.
Yeah.
But
you know, 2 years after Gaucho, Pete, that solo album is just absolutely incredible. It sounds like Steely Dan, right?
It's basically a Steely Dan. Nightfly is basically a Steely Dan album.
It's got the Gary Katz production, so it sounds like more of a natural heir to Asia than Gaucho, maybe even.
So do you guys think if it wasn't for Walter's heroin addiction, because that's what was going on during this period, that would have been released as a Steely Dan album and would be considered one of the great Steely Dan albums?
I think so.
Probably. I don't see why not. The whole gang's there. Look at the credits, man. Everybody's there except one name.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it probably would have been.
Yeah.
I agree.
So let's take a look at some of these early records. So we talked about Can't Buy a Thrill. I mean, you know, I was just thinking Reelin' in the Years has what Jimmy Page has called his favorite guitar solo of all time for many decades, right? I mean,
Elliot Randall.
Yeah, just right. And then the work of Skunk Baxter, I think, cannot be estimated because he's so much a part of these early albums. And, you know, and then he went from this band to the Doobie Brothers, right? So he just basically, he was right in there. But yeah, I mean,
he brought the rock element to it.
There's a huge rock element to this.
And
that's why I've always said that this is probably their true rock album in the catalog. And, you know, you can make the case for a couple of these other albums, but this is a rock album.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the rock album because of Skunk Baxter. I think he's the one who brought that. Especially when you listen to the guitar solos in it, everything ramps up tenfold during those guitar solos.
But the solos, the thing about everything's so well thought out. You know, the solo is perfect for the song. All the playing is meticulous. I don't want to say it's too clean. It's not, but everything just fits perfectly. You know,
can I ask you guys?
I would never all those guitar solos. I can't think of any other way that you'd want to play them. I couldn't accept anything else.
The electric sitar solo and Do It Again.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's not a guitar or a sitar at all. Apparently, it's Denny Diaz playing some kind of toy keyboard, somehow making it sound like a sitar. This is 1972, people. They're coming up with this kind of trickery. It's madness. It's absolute madness. It's just crazy what they were doing back then.
In the hands of these guys, that would not surprise me at all.
That's a credit.
It sounds like a choral sitar to me, but
yeah,
what do I
I've heard that from a couple sources. Don't know if it's true, but we know it's Denny Diaz doing something. That's what we know is going on. Just incredible. Yeah, what a fun record. A little bit, like I said, with the multiple lead singers. Maybe suffers from a bit of an identity crisis, but if you've got 2 top 10 singles on your debut album, you're clearly doing something right. Oh, and those 2 top songs both had the weirdos singing, right? So clearly America was just fine with Donald's voice. So we didn't need David Palmer to kick around anymore. The whole idea that Donald Fagen wasn't to America's taste was put to bed real quickly there. A fantastic debut, 1972. How many classic albums came out that year?
I know, it's one of them. And we could talk all day about their hit singles, but what's great about this band are the deep cuts.
Yeah.
Change of the Guard, Brooklyn, Fire in the Hole.
Midnight Cruiser.
Midnight Cruiser.
I mean, side 1 is just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, it's all brilliant. Don't get me wrong, but man, Do It Again, Dirty Work, Kings, Midnight Cruiser, bang, hit. I mean, they weren't hits, but hit after hit after hit in my mind.
But they sound like hits.
Yeah,
they sound like hits because
hits.
It's sophisticated. I look at this as sophisticated pop rock.
Yeah,
because it's pop, like you said.
Yeah, but it's very technical.
Right. So it's very sophisticated. There was nothing like this that was fresh. This is brand new stuff.
And we talk about how the second album really had no massive hits, but go and look at this track list now.
Yeah, but this is a fantastic album despite it. I mean, it's all deep cuts. It's fantastic.
And it's great deep cuts. These are deep cuts that made like all their greatest hits compilations, Bodhisattva, The Boston Rag, Your Gold Teeth, Showbiz Kids, My Old School. My Old School has become a FM radio staple in the years since this came out.
There's songs that became hits later on.
Yes.
There's songs that are now played on the radio, but I think that's due to the other albums. But it just shows that maybe there wasn't the right promotion. Maybe, who knows what went on with it in it. But those songs just as good because now they're concert staples.
Yeah. Now, do you think that this album is on a tour? Do you think this is the album that basically introduced the jazz elements into the band?
More so than the debut,
yeah. Maybe not fully yet, but yeah, for sure.
And maybe that's why overall the American record buying public in 1973 wasn't quite ready. They hadn't quite figured out Steely Dan, and just adding more of that jazz element to their sound with Countdown, coupled with the fact that they did not have a big single on here like the debut. I know the label was disappointed in sales on this thing, but to their credit, they stayed with the band, and as a result, retroactively, every single song on Countdown to Ecstasy sounds like it belongs on a greatest hits album to me.
Yeah.
It's their lowest selling album.
Well, is
it? Yeah.
Is it My Old School? One of those.
That's my favorite song from the band, not just this album.
But I think that gets a lot of clicks on Spotify. You know how you can go on Spotify and look at how they rank stuff. I think that's one of their most popular tracks. So
really,
yeah.
Well, the big hit came with the next album, right? And I think Ricky Don't Lose Their Number from Pretzel Logic, which is a great cover. Growing up as a New Yorker, right? I mean, Brendon, you know all about this, right? It's like back when I was a kid. Growing up in the 70s, and I don't go, we moved from the city in the early 70s, but I still had relatives, my grandparents living there. You would see this guy, not this guy, but a guy like this on every corner in New York City in the wintertime selling the hot pretzels and the chestnuts with this, the steam and the smoke coming out. Just such a New York album. But, Ricky Don't Lose That Number is really unlike any other song they've ever done. And I think it's a brilliant, brilliant song, and to this day is one of my favorite Steely Dan songs.
That's Jim Gordon on drums there, I think, right on that number. And I think he added a whole different kind of feel to Pretzel Logic versus the first 2 albums, because we got a different guy behind the kit here, and that was something a little bit new, something a little bit different. Also, Jeff Porcaro plays, I think, 2 tracks on here. So this is where you start seeing the disintegration of the classic Steely Dan lineup. Some people rank Pretzel Logic and the next one a little lower in the discography as a result of a band kind of testing their boundaries. We're going to be a studio only band. Are we a duo? What are we at this point? I don't think they really knew, and it's kind of fun to feel their growing pains on Pretzel Logic. I've always loved this album, probably because it's the first one I heard all the way through. How you have that sentimental connection. But this was the first. This is where I cut my teeth on the Dan, was on this album, and I just adore it. I think it's amazing.
God, you have a good point, because this is where they are stretching out.
Yeah.
Because look, you've got the 12-bar blues. The title track is 12-bar blues. But laid back, the guitar licks on it absolutely kill.
Oh, it's a genius.
But then you've got them doing a cover. Did they do a cover of what was it? East Street Louis Toodaloo. Ellington.
Louis Toodaloo. I know that one was.
So it's just like
they did a little bit of everything on it.
You go from Berrytown, which is like one of my all-time favorite Steely Dan tracks, right to Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
I'm kind of all over the place, but man, it has a lot to offer.
Night by Night is a classic deep cut.
Night by Night.
Classic deep cut. Any major dude will tell you it's just a gorgeous song. Monkey in Your Soul. Title track is so good. I mean, there's not a bad song on there, but like when, the casual Steely Dan would look at this track list and be like, oh yeah, Ricky, don't lose that number. I don't know the rest of it.
Yeah.
It is so good. Right.
I'm not a New Yorker, Pete, but maybe it's the album cover, but this is the one that I always identify as their New York album.
Oh, it's 100%.
It feels very New York.
Doesn't it? Yeah, it's got that vibe.
Yeah.
But the songs on here are a lot more concise.
Yeah.
The other, it has a very different feel than the other albums. These are lively, they're interesting. There's, a lot of thought that can go into it, what this might possibly be. It's like looking at art, right? And then you just get this photograph of a guy, very blue collar, type thing, regular situation, and very New York, very situational. And I always found that to be really interesting, how they moved in terms of the representational, visually at least, of the album itself.
This is a really short album too.
It is, yeah.
It's like 32 minutes or something, right?
Yeah, but the songs are a lot more concise. They're a bit shorter. It's almost like they're honing in, but then again, they're branching out. Steely Dan's very complicated.
I think the next one's pretty short too. We're in the era of the short album here.
Yeah, you lied. The covers can't be any more different here.
Exactly.
Very artful here. Man, it's just can't get a New York hot pretzel for 15 cents anymore, right?
No.
What are they going for now, Brendon? I'm trying to think of I haven't hung out in the city since before COVID.
I don't know, like $4.
I was going to say $4 or $5. Yeah.
$5 probably.
They were $2 when I came in '99. So
I remember when they were $2 or $2.50. I remember they were $1.50, but
right,
15 cents, man. That's
I know, that's crazy.
Those were the days.
Those were the days. All right, back to Katie Lade. Yeah. So here, all of a sudden now you're starting to see a lot of more the Steely Dan staples infiltrating the set list. I mean, the track list here. So, Black Friday, obviously a very popular song. Dr. Wu became it. And I think, I don't remember Grant who mentioned it, but when we were talking about the albums where I think that kind of smooth jazz element is coming into the play a lot more, I think it really starts on this album.
It starts on that.
You have elements in the two before, but I think here's where it starts happening. God, this has got Chain Lightning, Your Gold Teeth is so good. Bad Sneakers, great song. Any World.
I think they knew when they were doing this record, there was not one single chance of any of these songs ever being played live by anything called Steely Dan on the road. I don't know if they were 100% sure about the status of the band when they were doing Pretzel Logic. Maybe they were, still thinking maybe they'd do some dates. By the time Katie Lade came around, they knew this was a studio only thing. So the songs changed as a result.
Yeah.
They kind of got some breathing room in them. Some of the rock elements certainly been sanded down by this point. A lot of people kind of poke fun at Katie Lade. They don't like Katie Lade. They think it's like a red-haired stepchild in the discography. If you're a guitar player, man,
yeah,
you
it's
shouldn't be casting any dispersions. When you got Denny Diaz coming back, you got Rick Derringer on this record, Dean Parks, Elliot Randall,
Larry
of course,
Carlton.
Hugh McCracken, Larry Carlton. Don't forget Walter plays on this record too, and that cat can play the guitar a little bit too. Yeah, I don't want to hear about it. Katie Lade is awesome. It's just such a cool record.
And Michael McDonald makes his first appearance.
Yes, he does. His first.
Yeah.
We talked about Dude going from Steely Dan to the Doobies. Well, now here we got Dude from the Doobies coming into Steely Dan. I guess they were doing, lots of that kind of stuff back in the 70s. That's pretty cool, though.
But with promotion at the time, selling this as the band was no longer touring, being a studio-only band, regardless of what that meant, it's bound to have put a different idea in the general public's mind. And so regardless of how good the album actually is, and the fact that Jeff Baxter isn't there either, and this is the sort of end to the whole band thing, they're moving way more towards all studio musicians at this point. So I don't know how much of that was within the media. It's not like the internet today where we would absolutely know all of that.
Yeah.
But the people that chose to read in the magazines, the interviews, that sort of stuff that got that may well have taken a step back saying, well, this isn't my Steely Dan anymore. This is something else. And for me, at least in sound, I think it is a big shift from the first three albums. And I've always looked at the first three as one era, and then starting here being something completely different.
Yeah, this is the studio era.
Yeah,
because you might have Denny Diaz back, but that's it.
Yeah,
I mean, the band's over. This is now a studio.
And I do believe it is around this point in time that the band gets a new representation. They get new management. Oh, wait a second! It's the same people that represented the Doobie Brothers. Funny how funny how that works.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, who would have thunk?
Well, why did? Well, other than the band fell apart, and that's why Jeff Skunk Baxter left.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah,
wasn't the whole thing with Michael McDonald is that didn't he want to have more of a presence within Steely Dan, and Fagan wouldn't hear that, and so he pretty much left. Well, I don't know if he was really here. I just understood. I don't know where I read it. Tell me if I'm full of crap. But I thought he wanted to really have more of a say within this entity. And he basically went over with Skunk Baxter and turned the Doobie Brothers into the Steely Dan.
I wouldn't be surprised, though.
I think that's true. I don't know. Maybe someone in the comments could elaborate.
They'll know.
Yeah.
I think, also, too, we talked a bit about how during this era, bands would album tour. That's kind of what you did. And if you were going to take the touring part of it out of the equation, well, then you got to sell more records and you got to be played on the radio, right? You need more hit singles. So it's almost like the band said, well, we're not going to go do that anymore. So we're going to put everything we have, all of our energy into the studio creations. We're going to make them sound the best that they possibly can be. And we're going to have the best possible players on each and every album. So it's going to be an all-star affair. And there's going to be loads of great songs and the albums are going to sell. And they did, right? So that's basically what they did. They got rid of the touring aspect of it and they pumped everything into the records. And they stopped at no expense to get the best musicians on the planet to make their creations come to life. And I think for me, anyway, where that really, really sounds like it fully happened was on the Royal Scam. Which to me, I mean, I know everybody has their favorite Steely Dan record. This is my favorite Steely Dan record. This to me is just absolutely brilliant from start to finish, from the cover artwork to, I mean, just look at the track list. Kid Charlemagne, Caves of Altamira, Don't Take Me Alive, Sign In Stranger, The Fez, Golden Earrings, Haitian Divorce, Everything You Did in the Royal Scam. There's not a weak track there. Not a weak track there. Pop, jazz rock, funk, yacht rock, if you want to call it that now. But this is where bringing in these jazz cats to make these albums sound amazing really, really paid off.
No, did it ever?
Larry Carlton on Don't Take Me Alive is a monster. Holy crap.
You tell me the best drummer who's ever played drums in Steely Dan. And wow, a whole lot of names pop up at you, but I'm going with Bernard Purdie.
Yeah,
Purdy's great.
Oh.
Purdy, Percaro, Gadd. I mean, name them. There's so many.
Yeah, the list goes on and on and on, but something about his style, something about the way he drums to me, just the perfect marriage. And he's all over this. I think you've got you've got Rick on like 2 tracks here, but the rest is Bernard. This is his album. He dominates it. He's perfect for the Dan. I'm kind of with Pete. If you put a gun to my head, Royal Scam's my favorite Dan album. Awesome.
Also, we have a new element here too that we haven't had on the Steely Dan album, and that would be some reggae influence with Haitian Divorce.
A little bit, yeah.
We've got a little bit of raga.
Yep. Yep. They weren't afraid to go there.
Nope.
Yeah, there's too many classics on this album. I mean, and you got the bookends, right? Kid Charlemagne, the Royal Scam, the title track. Everything in between is amazing, but and you've got the hits on here, and you've got amazing deep cuts that to me are just as worthy as the hits.
Oh yeah.
And what a great sounding album too.
Oh
yeah, it's hard to sound bad when your rhythm section is the aforementioned Bernard Purdie and some guy named Chuck Rainey. His bass tone on this record, man, it's like, Walter, we love you, dude, but you don't need to get anywhere near your bass. Chuck's got this covered. Oh man, yeah, it's hard to imagine an album sounding better than the Royal Scam. It really is, but this crew, I think, actually ratcheted it up a notch for the next one, which is just insane to me because this album is so perfect. It's so beautiful. I love everything about the Royal Scam, but there's just something about that next one, man.
So before we move on to the next one, just so everybody knows who played on this album. So we got Donald Fagen, of course, on keys, Victor Feldman, another great jazz guy, Paul Griffin and Don Grolnick, another great jazz guy, Walter Becker, Larry Carlton, Denny Diaz, Dean Parks, and Elliot Randall on guitar. So that's like the kind of the guitar crew appears on most of these albums here. Bass, Chuck Rainey and Walter Becker. Drums, Rick Marotta, Bernard Purdie, Victor Feldman and Gary Coleman on percussion. Then, of course, you got Chuck Finley, Bob Finley, Slide Hyde, Jim Horn, Plas Johnson, and John Clemmore on horns. And then all these backing vocalists, including Michael McDonald. So this was a special crew they got together, and that crew would get larger over the next couple albums too. But it's just, you've got this great meeting of the musical minds of these great pop songwriters and these amazing jazz and rock musicians, and boom, you get the music of Steely Dan. So, but I think like the Royal Scam to me is the perfect introduction to fully grasp what Asia is all about. But Asia is a different beast.
Yeah, it is.
It's because you still rock on Royal Scam. This one we've gone. Yeah. There's a touch there, but this is full tilt jazz rock.
People would say this is their big album. They're perfect. You guys were talking about it before we got started. It's actually my least favorite.
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah, it's too
it's brilliant.
It just doesn't grab me. It's the album I tried to start with when I was trying to get into the band, and people kept talking about it, and I was just like, why is this considered to be so great? I've since come around to it, but it isn't one that I go back to all that often. But I like the more rock element of it.
Well, maybe that's why. Maybe because it's a pretty laid back album.
Yeah.
This is an album that really breathes. I mean, we have to, and Scott, maybe we get into that whole discussion that we did before we started taping about the production of this album and why it's revered as one of the greatest sounding albums of all time. But this album really, I think the songs are great, yes, but I think the production is what makes this album, because it just breathes and flows.
There's a lot of air.
And a lot of air, and every little nuance of what's being played in the studio, you can perfectly hear it, right? There's no bombast on this album. There's no fast stuff. There's no real rock stuff. But again, so what is this album?
Honestly, the secret
rock.
For a lot of the success of how good those Steely Dan records sound, we've mentioned all these really amazing cast, these session dudes that come in and out of their records, but how about Gary Katz's production? This dude gets no love. He never won a Grammy. He actually was nominated 4 times. He was nominated for Best Producer for Asia, Best Producer for Gaucho, and then Album of the Year and Best Producer for the Night Fly. Didn't win any of those, man. How is that even possible? This guy created the best sounding album I have ever heard. I'm not saying it's my favorite album. I don't even think it's my favorite Steely Dan album. But the production of Asia to these ears has never been topped. I just think it's absolute sonic perfection.
Speaking of Gary Katz, does anybody here have the Rosie Villa album that came out in the early 80s?
I've heard
Gary
it.
Katz producer.
Okay.
You've got Fagan and Becker playing on it. It's essentially a Steely Dan record with Rosie Villa singing. So if you like Steely Dan and you're unaware of it, it is an unknown gem. It's got everybody that's on it have been on Steely Dan.
It's the first Steely Dan album, basically. Yeah. They put it on the shelf forever.
Huh. I'll have to check.
Rosie Villa, check it out.
Finally saw the light of day in some capacity, but it's an interesting relic, you know. But early Dan, they'd been trying for a long time. I guess there's stories of you know, Becker and Fagan knocking on the doors of the Brill building, you know, hey man, we're songwriters, let us in. It's like, who are these guys, you know? So I guess finally they got one of their songs on a Barbra Streisand album. So, you know, these guys have been trying for a long time, and you got to give credit where credit's due. Again, it goes right smack dab to the heart of Gary Katz, who had been working in New York. He'd been working with the Brill Building people. He'd been working with Jay and the Americans. And apparently he took a job with ABC Dunhill in LA. And that was the genesis for this whole thing happening. If Gary Katz doesn't get that gig with ABC, we're probably never talking about Becker and Fagan. So Gary Katz, my eternal gratitude for everything you gave us, and never even won a Grammy. It's not right. Not right.
I wonder who won the Grammy this year, this particular year.
Right?
Who
beat him?
I have no idea.
See, there you go. Nobody knows, right?
Nobody knows.
Here we are talking about Gary Katz.
Everybody knows how great the production of this is, but they don't know what it lost to, right? Yeah.
What beat Asia?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not my favorite Steely Dan album either, but I do think it's a brilliant album. It's a different album in this catalog for sure, but there's just some great songs. Like title track is brilliant. Deacon Blues is cool. Peg and Josie, I mean, are like together, right?
I was going on and on about Bernard Purdie being the best guy that ever played in Steely Dan, but if I had to pick one song, like, you know, if you want to hear what a really good drummer sounds like, I might be picking the title track for Asia. Yeah. Listen to what Steve's doing here. That's a good drummer right there.
Yeah. And, you know, some of Larry Carlton's best work is in this band. Yeah. Even though he's got some great solo stuff, and he was with the Crusaders and done all sorts of, oh, look at that.
Oh, beautiful.
Teddy's got to come up.
You got a Steely Dan fan there. There we go.
That is awesome. Now we got Lee Ritenour. I mean, just the level, if you read the credits of Asia, what's it, like 40 people, I think, in total?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Well,
just insane.
At what point are they no longer a band?
Yeah,
it's all session musicians and outside people, and we just
Katie lied. That's
Donald
where it
Reagan
happened.
And Walter Becker. I mean, what is it, right? Yeah. And if three of us now have said this isn't our favorite album, why do we think this is their highest selling album, 2 million copies, and the one that constantly critics say was the best album? Is that just the production?
No, I think it might be, if you had to pick the most commercial, accessible Steely Dan album. You've got Peg on here, you got Black Cow on here, you got Josie on here, you got, you know, Black Sunday. You got a lot of songs that everybody knows that are pleasing, aesthetically very nice. So I think that might be why the average person doesn't care. I'm not even an audiophile, so, you know, I could be dead wrong. The thing could be produced horribly. I know nothing about it. All I know is that everybody always says it sounds good. I've been brainwashed into believing it because it sounds amazing. So I think it's just the songs and the level of accessibility there.
Yeah, it's got the iconic cover too, and yeah, I mean,
the cover fits the music perfectly.
It totally.
Yeah.
Which somehow Phil Hartman, you know, we talk about the Chevy Chase connection all the time with Steely Dan and the Leather Canaries, but apparently Phil Hartman had a little something to do with the graphic design for the Asia album cover.
Really?
Phil did all these Poco album
Poco,
covers.
yeah.
Like,
Yes, he did.
This
Phil Hartman.
one,
oh,
he did all of
interesting.
them.
I don't know.
Cool
This
stuff.
is an album that's a
Well-
late night album for me. I'll throw this on if it's late night, early morning, but any other time of the day,
It's
I'm
a late
reaching
night
for
record.
something else.
Yeah,
Well-
and that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do think that this is their peak because they kept morphing, changing. They hit this.
Yeah.
They didn't really alter anything much after that. Yeah,
Right.
I would say that Gaucho's a little even more light rock,
Yeah.
and it's still yachty, more yachty than this.
But I think
Yeah.
there's
But they
more
still,
popping.
they like I said, this was their peak, and they just kind of, leveled
and they
off.
wrote it.
And the songs, the production, the sequencing on this record,
Mhm.
it's perfect. It's meticulous, well thought out. There isn't a bad note here. I can see it's their masterpiece. You might like a different. I like Katie Lyde's my favorite. You might like a different one. You might
you
like
go.
Earl
There you
Sam,
go.
but
You
I
hit the
can
nail on the head,
see-
Grant.
I
Right?
can see how this is their masterpiece.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
This is their, to me, that being a prog guy, my analogy is this is their close to the edge. Even though I probably prefer Tales from Topographic Oceans, just on a personal level, you can't deny the greatness of
You love
Asia.
Tails, right?
Oh, I love Tales.
I can't get into that
Tails
one.
He
is
doesn't
my-
like Tails.
I love
I
Tales.
don't hate
I'm not even
Tails.
going to ask Martin how he feels about
I
it.
don't hate Tails. I don't, but it's not nearly one of my favorites. No.
No. I'm a close to the edge guy.
Yes.
Close to the Edge is brilliant. That is what Asia is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
To-
Yep.
yeah.
And you have to wonder, we talked about how over time the love for this has really grown, but there's a bunch of years in between when these two albums came out. You have to wonder if they would have followed up Asia with Gaucho a little bit sooner, that this would have caught on, because as we've said, it's really not that much difference between these albums. This kind of like Gaucho kind of falls a little bit in line with this. Maybe it's a little less kind of complex from a production and musical standpoint, arranging, but I don't think it's all that much different. But they took a few years away, and I think if this would have come out like within say 2 years after Asia, maybe 3 tops, might have been looked at a little bit differently at the time. I don't know.
So did they
What's
just
the
take
delay
a
about?
break in between?
Yeah.
Were there drug issues? Do we know why it took 3 years before they did Gaucho? Do we know?
There were issues.
There were issues. Okay.
Yeah, there were issues. There was a lot of things going on, not just with Walter, with Donald also, and there were some feuds as well as other types of things going on, and just typical things. Man, these guys were really successful after Asia. There was a little bit of, man, we need to just kick our heels up, take a victory lap, smoke a big old fat cigar. Mom, I made it, right? There was a
Well,
little
big old
bit
fatty
of
of
that going
something.
on. After
But the thing
Asia.
Don't forget that Asia was the last ABC album, and then ABC fell apart. This is the first album for MCA.
That's right.
That's interesting.
And I don't know how that might have had something to do with it.
Well, I
It seems
know.
like
well,
there's
they
a
When
lot
I
of
was
things-
working in the business, this was a very, very big deal for MCA. They were going all in with the Dan. And if you remember, they went back and they got the rights to the older stuff. They put out the Steely Dan Gold double album. They were all in on the Dan. So the support from the label was not a problem. Absolutely not. The enemy was from within, man. It was with Steely Dan. But keep in mind too, the industry from 1977 to 1980,
Changed.
it done changed a little bit, boys and girls. It was a whole different landscape. So maybe Walter and Donald saw the handwriting on the wall before anybody else and figured, hey, Gaucho's our swan song. Well, hey, we'll see you later. And they were right on the money there, I think.
And what year was
well, they took, I think what I read is that they took it. Asia really, I think Donald Fagen, maybe Walter both said it in an interview. Fagen said they took it as far as they could go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think they really wanted to do Gaucho, but they did it. And I don't know if they were exactly happy with Gaucho, but they were happy with Asia. But Asia, that's where they took it. And that's
What
got
year
another
was,
record out of them.
the
Thank
FM
God.
film? What year was the FM film? Because they had the single.
80.
Oh, right.
Oh, no,
79?
78.
Was it 78? Yeah, it might have been
Because
78.
FM was recorded during Asia sessions.
That's right. So yeah, it was 78.
Yeah, so they wrote
And it
that
fits
for a
right
little
in with
bit
Asia
there as well,
Yeah.
giving them some breathing room too. But do you think the record label changing the label basically said we want Asia Part 2? And that's why we get something that's more, in line with that, not really breaking any new ground.
I don't think so. I think
No?
they took it as far as they could go.
And
you got Gaucho. All right, here's some more songs, but we can't go any further. And
running on fumes. And it's always interesting to see what a band does after they know it was a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Critics knew it was a masterpiece. It's so doggone good. Even the record buying public agrees and bought it. So just a masterpiece all the way around. Everybody knows it. That's going to affect your brain, right? It's going to affect the way you proceed when you go in the studio next time. And it's always been a very interesting thing is like, what do you do after you record Dark Side of the Moon, right? Where do you go from there, man? And Asia's got to be one of those moments. What do you do? It's got to scramble the brain because a part of you knows.
Yeah.
You're never going to do anything that good.
Even in saying all that, yes, but then Fagen goes out and does the Night Fly, which everybody looks at as that lost Steely Dan album.
Every bit is good. Yeah.
It's every bit is
good. It is. Yeah. Well, that's the genius of Donald Fagen. I mean, I can't. He's not like normal people, right?
No, he is not.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we love this band.
I think so.
They're just not normal people at all. Their lyrics bespeak it, the structure of the band, the history of the band. They're a band unlike any other. So for a topic like what is it? Who are these guys? I don't think we've even come close to answering that question yet.
No, ultimately they are just Steely Dan. That's what they are, right? They're their own entity, and the lyrics are all very personal. There's a lot of stories being told here. The music encompasses lots of different genres, but doesn't really sit in any of them. So yeah, so have we accomplished anything in this hour discussion? Maybe not, but I think what we have discovered is that Steely Dan music, whatever it is ultimately Steely Dan music. And that's a good thing, right? Because we need unique bands like this that don't necessarily sit in any one box, but we love them for the way that they are different and unlike any other band. So
absolutely.
I love it in that you have artists as crazy as I've heard Ghost are actually fans of Steely Dan. St. Vincent, I've heard, is a big fan.
Their stock has risen considerably. I'm hearing so many young bands talk about Steely Dan and people that are 20 and 30 years younger than me. And I'm going, how do you even know who this is?
Yeah.
So Steely Dan's definitely having a second sort of revival, whether through younger bands calling them out or them finding it through their parents. I don't know what, but I think it's awesome. And it stands as a testament to the quality of the music that they created.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. Well put.
Yep.
R.I.P. Walter.
So, folks, we will be having a very similar conversation next month. But we will be talking about another band that also is very hard to classify, but we love them anyway. The Alan Parsons Project. So that'll be happening next month. So tune in for that. Are they prog? Are they pop? Are they yacht rock? Are they soft rock? We're going to get to the bottom of it, or maybe we won't. So tune in next month for that. Let's get a little updates from everybody here on the panel about what's going on their channels. Brendon, we'll start with you. What's happening over on the Brendon Snyder on YouTube?
Yeah, so I just filmed a Led Zeppelin album ranking. Surprisingly, I never done one on my channel, so I decided to get that one under my belt. We'll be posting at the time you're watching this, which I assume is tonight, Pete. That'll be posted tomorrow, so you guys can check that out. I've also filmed a video called What I Hate About CDs. Considering I have 12,000 CDs in the background, you guys know how much I love them. There are things I hate about it. So I got a couple different things coming out on my channel that you guys can go over and catch up on. Yeah, right?
What does that say?
Anything. I know. Yes, that's one of my points.
Very cool.
But that's nothing new.
I know.
But when they came out, I remember I got my first CD in '85. And go, God, that's awful small, but all right, whatever.
Hey, thank goodness the CEO of Sony was a Beethoven fan and wanted to have all of Beethoven's Ninth on one disc, or else it would have been even shorter. It would have been even smaller. It was going to be like 4 inches instead of 4.5.
You imagine?
Scott, were you working?
Oh, yeah.
Were you working in the
Oh
industry?
yeah,
By
I was
the
working
industry,
during
I
that
mean the
transition.
business.
Yeah.
Okay, I know this is on a tangent, but I have to know what, or I'll forget. When you first started stocking CDs, did you have like? It must have been like a small little.
It was
like
one row of vinyl converted into
one
two
row.
rows of CDs with the long boxes still on them.
Remember those long boxes?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
I remember going to
boxes.
Musicland in like 1985. That's when they started to do it, and that's exactly what they did.
Yep, I got my first
And
batch
I remember
from CBS, and I never liked them.
Oh, I loved it. I grabbed onto it instantaneously. I
Yeah.
said, hallelujah.
Yeah, I never liked them. I cracked open the Clash's first album. I put it on the CD player. I'm all excited. What happened to the crash cymbal? You know the deal taking analog to digital. The early stuff they was done really badly. A cymbal crash would like disappear.
The digital to analog converters in the early CD players weren't all that hot.
No,
That
the
was your
whole thing was
problem.
wonky. Yeah.
The later ones sound a lot better, and you listen to those original CDs; they sound top notch.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a lot had to do with the hardware at the time. So
I'm thinking his hardware and software both were extremely wonky at the time. They didn't know
it was early. It was early.
It was early on, and I was my mind was made up. I didn't like them.
Vinyl,
me, I embraced it.
Way back to when it was cylinders, and it wasn't fantastic either. It took a while to get vinyl to where it is.
Modern CD players now sound, you don't have to spend a whole lot, and they sound damn good.
Yeah.
Onkyo still makes a single CD player, and it sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Just saying. There we go on a tangent.
I just like vinyl because it's bigger. I'm not an audiophile guy, man. Half of my vinyl's not even open. Right? I get a download code. I'm good. I just like them because they're big and I can put them behind me in my background
as a prop.
As I do videos for the Prog Corner YouTube channel. Absolutely. Where this week on the channel, Pete Pardo, we're continuing with Charisma Month on the channel. Charisma Records of Bergen, Norway, making big noise in the world of prog rock. Norway's on fire. So I'm continuing by reviewing the new one from Mir.
Yes.
It's a CD. Look at that. It's a CD.
All right, everybody, take a screenshot and preserve it.
And we did Rituals album that Pete was just showing right there.
Right.
I gave this 10 out of 10. So we're going to be talking to
you said that's your album of the year, right?
The new To Smork, we're going to be looking at also. And then we're going to be going through my vinyl collection because apparently people are enjoying as, the little flip through videos that people do. I did A, B, C, and D. So I guess I'm going to do E and F next week. That's exciting to people. I don't understand it. It's almost like watching me and Andy Edwards, doing a fake feud. People seem to enjoy that kind of stuff. YouTube's a funny beast, Pete Pardo.
It is.
A funny beast.
It is. When is what's the release date on that To Smork?
The To Smork is August 30th. Oh, the dawn of Oberon.
Look at you. Look at you with that pre-release copy. Holy moly.
Look at you.
Why do you think I'm having Charisma Month on the channel, Pete Pardo? It's like, please, I'll do whatever you want. Just give me this To Smork early. Oh, so good. I love these guys.
I'm sure it's good. Their last one was spectacular. So yeah.
I like this one perhaps even a little bit better.
Okay, that's good.
It's a little more unhinged and just weird.
Okay.
And that's what I love about To Smork. I don't want them sounding like other people. I just want them to sound all weird, like they got lost in some dark Scandinavian forest for like a year, and they're smelly, and their clothes are all like ratty and whatnot. They got the witch's cauldron in the middle of the forest. These guys are just amazing. I love them to death. So yeah, that's what we got cooking on the Prog Corner, Pete.
Cool. Grant, how about you? What's happening?
Oh, well, I don't know if I could top that, but on the Contrarians, I'm working on a show that'll be up for our Patreon community. We're looking at 5 bass players who are, shall we say, not looked at very favorably and need a lot more love. I don't know if I've come up with a title yet, but I'm working on it. And tonight in the warehouse at 8 p.m., I don't know when this is airing, Pete, But 8 p.m. tonight in the warehouse, we are doing a listening party. Rachel's Ghost will be there, and we are going to play 2 hours of 70s music. So
could I please put a nomination in for that bass player list? Ray Shulman of Gentle Giant.
Yeah, Ray didn't make it.
Yeah,
he should.
But he's good. Don't get me wrong, but he's one of those, you know, he deserves way more attention. So, but that's coming up. That's
amazing.
Fun. I can't wait.
excellent.
Cool. Let's see, what do we got coming up? So, of course, tomorrow is Hudson Valley Squares night here on SOT. We're going to be talking about our 5 favorite albums each from 1972, one of the greatest years ever in music, especially rock. So that's coming up tomorrow night on the Squares. And then the usual stuff to right. See, there we go. Steely Dan, 1972, the debut. Wednesday should have some new album reviews for you this Wednesday. I hope to do the new Ritual and a couple others. I got a whole stack of stuff. You know, being out with COVID last week, I didn't get to listen to anything. So I'm going to be playing catch up, and the stack keeps getting bigger. So that's coming up this week. And then next Sunday, I'll be ranking the albums. Oh, look at that. There you go.
yin and yang.
He's that cat that played George Harrison on Broadway.
Oh,
In Beatlemania?
Remember that Let It Be Broadway show? He made a big splash because he got up and did George Harrison, did Across the Universe, played guitar, looked just like him, sounded exactly like him. He's got a prog album out. So,
wow.
Shout out to JT.
There you go. There you go. And ranking the albums of Anthrax will be next Sunday. So we're going to jump back into metal for a week here on the channel.
nice.
So stay tuned for all that and more. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. We'll see you here next month on What Is It when we tackle the Alan Parsons Project. Till then, for Brendon Snyder, Scot Lade, and Grant Arthur, I'm Pete Pardo. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow on the Hudson Valley Squares. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye, guys.